I'd like to thank our representatives from TD Bank, Carla, Adrian, and Sharon, for volunteering to give this presentation. We've got cash flow resiliency and operational controls in unprecedented times.
So welcome everyone, and thank you for inviting us to join you in sharing some information about cash flow resiliency and operational controls in unprecedented times. So my name again is Carla Creeman. I'm a district manager at TD Bank, and I've been with the bank for 17 years and in the business for 34 across a number of disciplines. And I'm joined today by a couple of experts in the field. Adrian Turpak is one who is our VP of Technical Marketing in TD Corporate Products and Services. Adrian is the segment manager for Corporate and Specialty Banking in Treasury Management.
So cash flow resiliency and operational controls in unprecedented times. As we all know, we are certainly in a very interesting and difficult period, not only in our personal lives, but our work lives. So today we're going to talk a little bit about some topics that may help you certainly in your work environment, and also talk about let me just go through the agenda very quickly, and hopefully I will be joined in the near future by my colleagues, Carla Creeman, who is a district sales manager for TD Bank. And we also have Shannon Wallace-Smith, who is a Treasury Management Officer. My name is Adrian Turpak, and I also work in Treasury Management Services, but I work within the Technical Marketing Group, specifically for as a segment manager that oversees large corporate and specialty. I work across the board with commercial clients as well as government clients. So thank you again for having us today. So our agenda really is to talk, obviously, to do our quick introduction, but also to talk about Treasury Perspectives, which is a survey that TD has sponsored for the last 3 years. And we're coming out with some of our latest results in the next couple of weeks here. We'll talk about the digital transformation in payments, as well as more of a public service announcement, if you will, about fraud and security controls, and ultimately about, continuing your journey, right? Like, what can you take from this session to talk to, whether it's your bank partners or other partners that help you with your day-to-day, bank activities and treasury management activities. So this is a quote from McKinsey, and they refer to, of course, again, what we're dealing with today as the eye of the storm. And we're having to really reprioritize, and we're seeing this across the board with all of our customers, kind of reprioritize what's important, what's not. This great experiment, as Kapil references here, it certainly is a great experiment, right? One that we were sort of thrust into. And although we've been talking to our clients, for many years about ways to automate, ways to digitize, it really hasn't come to the forefront until, again, this new environment of working from home or being able to work with a partial staff, or having to really juggle, in office versus out of office. So it sort of a hybrid, if you will. So I'm sure this resonates with you, and we'll be talking a little bit more about it, but I did want to touch on the Treasury Perspective survey, which really helps us, focus on what the respondents. Now, I did mention earlier that this is our 3rd year doing the survey, and it really focused on 4 main topics: the economic environment, treasury operations, technology, as well as regulations and compliance. So this slide here really just focuses on 2 of those. One is the treasury operations, which highlighted, and this year as well, that manual processes are really bogging down operations, right? The time-consuming type of activities, including payments as well as forecasting. And I know in the government space, the reconciliation piece is also really sort of one of those pain points that you deal with on a daily basis. And the respondents also had basically said that about a third of them, I actually think it would be quite higher, cannot perform all their duties, right, within the normal workday. We're certainly working longer hours, especially from home. I come from a treasury management background, so prior to joining the bank, I did spend 20 years, part of my time at Prudential Financial and another few years in Sharp Electronics. So I managed treasury as well as AP and AR. So I know these pain points very well and can certainly identify with what you all are doing or that your staffs are doing each and every day. From a technology use standpoint, you know, everyone's sort of excited about the new emerging technology. However, they're slow to apply that technology. And we're seeing that in this year's results as well. I think it was 82%. So they were excited about technology or technological developments, but really weren't either quite sure how to apply them or how quickly they could apply them to address some of these pain points. So with that tech adoption lagging, you really do see those manual processes continue to stifle progress. Okay, so again, the top operational challenges that respondents called out were those manual processes, staff capabilities and/or size. I know in other surveys, the average size of any treasury group or even accounts payable is somewhere between 3 and 6. So, you know, at times that really can be quite a strain on sort of the operations, certainly working from home, or if in some cases folks do need to go to the office and having to switch off, there's not necessarily, you know, all the staff that's needed to do that. And the other piece I wanted to highlight here, again, is the lack of technology or investment in the operations. So I can only imagine, you know, from the government side of the house that budgets are very much constrained, that it's not always easy to find the funding to invest in that new technology or to do digitization. So that's something that will continue to be a theme, and hopefully we'll be able to present to you some ways that we can help with that. Okay, so what activities take the most time? Again, just sort of reiterating here the payment management piece of it. I had called out earlier the reconciliations and accounting, but certainly payment management. And it's not only the payable side, right? Just whether it's cutting checks or paying electronically to vendors and suppliers, but it's also the incoming payments, right? So the receivable side of the house, even managing those, finding out where to apply if folks are paying making partial payments, trying to figure out what they're paying for, having to then also pivot to sending out notices to say that, you know, payment is still due, whether it's in part or full. So only really highlights the challenges from a day-to-day basis. And Carla, were you able to join us again?
I think, can you hear me okay?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, good, thanks.
Great. Is Shannon on the line as well, or?
I am. Can you hear me?
Okay, great. Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Okay. So let me chat a little bit about the digital trend. And this is some really good feedback that came from a survey that the Government Business Council had done. I believe it was in partnership with KPMG. And it really, you know, one of the questions that they asked was, what does digital transformation mean to you? We hear a lot about it, especially again in these unprecedented times. You know, what does that mean, and how can we really not only embrace the whole concept, but how do we invest, or how do we make sure, even if it's a phased approach, which is really the way it's going to need to happen going forward, it can't be a big bang, right? It is a phased approach, but it's absolutely a cultural change. It's challenging that status quo, which can be difficult at times, right? The only constant is basically change. And so there really needs to be an active management of that happening over time, and to get people comfortable with the idea of more automation and digitization. But what will it do ultimately? It's going to improve efficiency and accountability, as one respondent had noted. And it's really the idea of integrating that technology across the board. So it may not just be in the banking activities or the treasury management activities or accounts payable that you do, but it really is across the board. And then lastly, again, moving from heavy reliance on paper to that electronic format. So really moving ahead in terms of what can be automated, how it can be automated. So the top motivations for digital transformation, no surprise here, policy mandates or directives. A lot of times though, those mandates are established, but then maybe there's no budget to support it. I know I hear that a lot, but be that as it may, since it is a mandate, hopefully it opens up the conversation to say, well, yeah, absolutely, we want to do this. This is something that we want to, plan and kind of come up with that overall strategy. And what will it do for us? Well, there's those gains to productivity. I'm going to tie this one to what ranked sixth, which is essentially reducing redundancies and duplication. Wherever a shop can reduce any redundancies, right? So whether it's be paperwork or activities or things that are being entered into the system multiple times, we even see that, where we work as well, right? So whether you have an implementation process and information is being input multiple times in different places, wherever those redundancies can be minimized, will obviously help productivity. But there are other things that go into that. The improved safety and security was ranked third. We'll hear a lot about security. In fact, we have a whole piece that Shannon will talk about in terms of fraud, prevention and mitigation, and of course, better customer service, or in this case, for citizens or employees that you're working with. Okay, so what does the digital strategy look like, right? I mean, it's really important, especially when you think about what's happened to us in this environment, business continuity, almost like a disaster preparedness. So when you get into that flight or fight mode, you want to make sure that you already have sort of these processes in place that can help support you in that. So streamlining and digitizing wherever possible so that when crisis strikes, that particular piece of your operations is not in crisis mode. Maybe there's other things that you need to take care of, whether it be for employees or the citizens themselves. But once you have these processes kind of laid out, right, you have that business continuity plan and you feel really confident that it will work. And I'm sure a lot of them are being updated now that we've kind of gone through this whole event. Turning checks, as I mentioned earlier, into electronic payments wherever that can be done, wherever it makes sense, and enhancing that security to ultimately, throughout the entire process workflow, to reduce that risk. And this is a quote that I got from one of the other industry resources, which is basically only 25% of AP departments would say that their processes are highly automated. So you're not alone, right? 75% of AP departments are somewhere in between. I mean, there's anywhere from, a very manual environment to fairly automated, but not a whole lot are highly automated. So we always want to strive to get there. It is, again, sort of a phased approach, and really sitting down and evaluating what all the processes are that you want to tackle is the first step, right? And then identifying which to prioritize, et cetera, and working with your partners to do that. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about payables automation. And again, this is really something that's happening in the industry. We talked about the paper problem, right? So you have 30% of businesses, they're making a lot of their payments, so less than 30% of businesses make 70% of their payments electronically. So a lot of room for improvement there. We don't have the latest results on that particular one. We're hoping that continues to climb, of course, not only the number of payments that are electronic, but how many, whether it's corporations or government entities or what have you, that are really migrating more to electronic. And then 47% of businesses, they're saying, they want to eliminate paper and they wanted to implement that AP automation. It is a top priority going forward. But sometimes, there can be a little bit of paralysis there, right? Knowing perhaps, taking stock of everything that is happening and that you would like to tackle, but then maybe not knowing how to approach it, or not only how to approach it, but can you approach it, whether for budgetary reasons or maybe skill set within the group as well. That could be also another theme there. And then lastly here, 55% of AP teams say that, managing those bank account details, right, for vendors, or knowing in the case of receivables, how the funds will be coming in and kind of managing that whole thing, whether it's by check or electronic, or even the traffic coming in and out of the office. That can be time consuming. But certainly from a vendor perspective, those bank account details, not only time consuming, but it's challenging from the perspective of security, right? And we'll get into a little bit more about that. So when we think about traditionally what we've looked at in terms of how do we move from check or paper to electronic, we focused on those payment rails, right? That no longer is the case, or really shouldn't be the case. We're in a place now that we can think more holistically about, hey, I don't really care how the payment is made, other than perhaps not being by check. But even if it is paid by check, it's more about, how do I make sure that the payment is done on time? Or how do I make sure it's done in a timely manner so that I can take advantage of discounts? Or, what works best in terms of my overall, working capital equation? So payment networks, not thinking about the payment rails, is really something that's sort of revolutionized this idea of how to pay vendors. And ultimately what it means is, you look at your payment strategy, which payments could you possibly move to electronic, and then using a network that allows you to, once those vendors are in a particular network, and there are hundreds of thousands that are available that do it today, that will receive an ACH, that will receive a credit card payment. And so the network kind of takes care of that for you. It takes the guesswork out of it. It also takes out the security concerns, because through the network, participants are validated and their payment instructions are also verified. So again, takes the guesswork out of it. Basically send a file to the bank that says, here's who I want to pay, figure out how to pay it, which is really sort of almost gives you a sigh of relief. So that payment strategy I mentioned, and again, really kind of looking, it's not about focusing on the payment rail or the payment type. It's more about, how do I do it most efficiently? So, what are the benefits of a payment network? Well, it can certainly maximize efficiency and cost savings. We talked about, the time that accounts payable spends on doing this, or just regular treasury staff as well. So it's going to hopefully free them up to do more value-added activities. And we talked about, or I mentioned earlier, about reskilling, right? Where can you reskill staff to perhaps do something that's more value added, something that really needs more attention, other than when am I going to pay this and how am I going to pay it? So cutting down on the overall AP payment processing costs ensures that optimal, payment methods are used. So improving security and reducing fraud risk, again, I mentioned it earlier. It's really about, having it all in a central location, but again, taking the guesswork out of it, or having to actively manage that information. A payment network will already have that there for you. It's going to reduce exposure to check fraud. Checks can also be done through this type of network, and it's going to secure those payments. And then lastly, optimizing that working capital and driving AP revenue. There is the potential, if you will, for AP, I don't want to say become sort of a profit center, but there could be some reduced costs involved with paying by card or paying by ACH, where a vendor is participating in this type of network. So you can sort of monetize that to a certain extent. You have a greater control over the payment timing, and transforming, again, maybe not a revenue driver, but certainly offset some of the costs that you're currently incurring. Okay, so this may look very familiar in terms of, and maybe you've never seen a visual of it, but I think this really encapsulates what it takes to get from a purchase order all the way through to when the payment is made. As you can see, there's quite a few steps involved. Your process in your shop may involve many, many other steps. Maybe there's a few that you could eliminate from this where you've already made some changes and created some efficiencies, which is great, and I applaud you for that. But wherever you see these, all of this time that basically can be spent, and the hazards along the way of collecting and storing vendor information, or what payment controls, the policies and procedures we talked about earlier, perhaps they're documented, but they're not being actively followed or implemented. So even reinforcing what those payment controls are. And of course, all these other steps, again, I'm sure this resonates with you. I know as a practitioner, it did with me as well. And it took a lot of time to streamline, but again, ultimately you want to get the payment out the door. So with a payment network, you literally could, and again, a phased approach around how do we reduce the time spent, all of these activities that perhaps aren't even adding any value. How do we minimize that to make it a more streamlined approach and just get the payments out the door? And meanwhile, maybe monetize that to a certain extent. So, going from A to Z, which it will take, a few steps to get there, but we can, simplify that. Okay, so I'm going to move to receivables automation. Again, common theme here in terms of the manual processes. The groups are overworked, whether it's treasury, in this case, accounts receivable. So that is a top operational challenge. It continues to be in the new survey, which again will be coming out quite shortly. And the segments that you're really looking at, so from a government receivable standpoint, you've, again, taken care of your citizens and your employees. The payments run the gamut, right? And each may have their own unique requirements that you're trying to make sure are taken care of. Anywhere taxes and utilities, of course, are the biggest ones, and some other agencies here. So really, in thinking about that strategy I spoke about earlier, how could you segment, right, what's coming in and how those payments how they can be managed more efficiently as they come in the door.
Adrian, if we can take a pause for a second for
Sure.
our poll question. Give them a second or two. All right, I assume that's long enough for anyone to answer that question. So back to the show. Thanks.
Okay. Okay, so one of the ways that, again, traditionally we've handled receivables through a lockbox and deposit processing. A lot of offices will have the checks come to them directly and will try to do remote deposit as an example, but a lockbox for that higher volume is certainly more efficient, not only for the team, but also to collect those funds and to make sure that the deposits are done much quicker. You get access to the funds more quickly and efficiently, and you can apply them as quickly as you're receiving them and they're posted to your account. So there's that streamlined posting, hopefully automated through your accounting system, and you'll be able to track what outstanding receivables are left. So from a business continuity standpoint, again, what we've seen is a lot of folks that were doing that in office and now had to pivot. In the work from home environment, it's not really ideal to have any kind of checks that need to be deposited for someone to have to bring those home. And the same holds true for payables, right? So when it comes to check stock or signing those checks, or if there's a digital, in the printer, sort of the digital signature that's applied to that. Having to pivot to more manual is certainly a reason to kind of move to something like this. In this case, it would be on the receivables and the lockbox side. There's also the ability to do online billing and payment, right? So get paper invoices out of the hands of the team, be able to deliver invoices electronically, have the system really sort of manage the communication with whomever it is that needs to make the payment, allow them the flexibility to not only when they would like to make the payment, right, hopefully by that due date, certainly, but when they'd like to make that payment, and also how they'd like to make that payment. So it may be by ACH or maybe by credit card. This type of solution does allow the flexibility not only for your team, but also for the person that receives the bill and wants to make that determination of how it's paid. So the customer value there, in this case it would be for citizens, is those electronic coupons. They can recurring payments is something they need to pay month by month, or they can do installments, and of course there's multiple payment channels. So another solution that goes hand in hand with, again, more of an electronic focus here, is an automated workflow. Really pulls together things like electronic bill presentment and payment, and also the remote deposit and lockbox. It is this thing around sort of more of an integrated type receivables, if you will. So the magic sort of happens in the middle here. But if you look over to the right, your citizens, your employees, if they're making payments, whether it be by check or EFT or credit card, all of that information can really be taken in and distilled and provide you with not only the detail around those payments, how to apply them, and that will feed directly into whether it's an ERP or an system. There's artificial intelligence, typically that's involved here, learning. So over time, not only do you have the artificial intelligence to recognize certain things like a character recognition, but also over time kind of learns what the patterns are. That really makes it become more efficient as the system sort of takes in more and more of the data that you're looking for, or that you're getting from the payments, and that you would be looking to then leverage in your accounting system. So really the benefits here, with straight through processing, it really is more about how do you streamline from end to end. You're reducing things like, clearing these exceptions. There's that emerging technology piece that I had mentioned. You're auto aggregating the remittances from various sources. I mean, this is a pain point we hear all the time, that, whether it be via email, and it could be something embedded in an email, or it can be an attachment, or perhaps there is an electronic file that's coming over, and just really taking all those sources and putting it into a more efficient process for you at the end of the day. You have that automated cash reconciliation, the optical character recognition engines that I alluded to earlier. They can capture all of that data and integrate again with your accounting system, and hopefully really kind of minimize the challenges that you already have from the reconciliation side. Okay, so from here, I'm going to turn it over to Shannon, who will talk to you about payment fraud and security controls. And Shannon, I'm going to try to give you control of the remote.
Thank you.
Sure.
Adrienne, that was great, rich information that we've continued. I've had the opportunity for many of you that may be attending to have some dialogue about the opportunities out there, and just encourage you again to challenge your bankers, reach out to us, and let us share some of these potential solutions for you to be able to phase in and really make things efficient. And while we talk about these efficiencies, and Adrian had touched on briefly fraud, it seems to be front in mind in this most unprecedented time with fraudsters out there. They sincerely are on the rise. We've continued to see the trajectory just rise with fraud. And in today's environment where we've had to quickly pivot, work from home, some of the technology used was your personal computers, social sites on those, which allow, again, fraudsters to really hone in to collect information and compromise. We encourage everybody to really know how many ways there are for you to be compromised in just a payables environment. Historically, when I started my career, a couple of decades in banking, it was checks. They said checks would be gone by 2020. They, in fact, are not. And every time we put a check on the street in any capacity, it allows the fraudster to take that checking account number, and whether they create their own checks to mimic yours, or they use your checking number and routing information to create their own checks, it's that opportunity. It also allows them to be able to create an ACH debit by simply going to a website and entering your account information. We also see ACH credits, which are attempted in phishing that we'll speak about shortly, relative to asking your team to be able to change the payment mechanism and information. We do see, again, a rise in credit card fraud, but the majority still represents check volume in today's environment. And most organizations, while reconciling quickly, it can be days out, and fraudsters usually attempt in a bulk method where they look to attack with check, ACH, and card all at one time in multiple payments to prevent you from catching within a few days. This is pretty daunting when we look at this and we say that $26 billion of fraud was reported from the FBI that shares with you as a public service announcement, really to be alert, make sure that you are working through what your controls and policies and procedures are. While many organizations have those in place, it's about revisiting those, testing those, ensuring that your staff is really following those policies and procedures on a regular basis. Again, we've seen fraud continue to rise, but in 2020, which we don't have numbers, but I assure you when we get the next opportunity this time next year, that we'll see a significant uptick just reporting on what we've already seen. It really is about the diligence in what you have in your payables area today, and controls and process. Again, I highlight 26 billion is a pretty significant dollar there, and we want to talk to you about the business email compromise. While this is not an individual that's taking your checking account and used it to fraudulently create information, it's a fraudster that's created themselves to appear that they are an extension of your staff or on your staff. It may look like an email coming from your CFO. It may smell like it. It might really appear that what he or she is stating, that where their location is, seem legitimate, but is in fact not. There may be the dot moved over in one place where they've created this email requesting you to send money based on being a vendor, and they're changing their payment requirements. Maybe the urgency from a CFO that a payment needs to be made, and this is where it has to go. The vigilance and diligence that is needed behind your staff to know, I better authenticate, always authenticate. We recommend to all of our clients in every sector that not only should you require a written confirmation, you should create a verbal confirmation. You should be speaking once with someone to authenticate that information, as these fraudsters have gotten really proficient at what they do for a living. If only they'd spend that time to do something better in the world. But what we've seen, and when you recognize this number of $26 billion in the environment of they compromising an email and requesting you to send a wire transaction, that's an irrevocable payment, meaning that the receiver must allow their bank financial institution to send that back. Well, the fraudster's not going to allow you to send that back. And again, if it comes in a different environment for an ACH payment or a check payment, the fact that you have to take your organization, create an affidavit, report it to the police department, and potentially close an account or go through the process of what it takes to recoup those funds is pretty significant when there's technology out there to protect you from these fraudsters. So when we talk about, again, a survey readiness of pain points that what we see in today's world, especially in the government sector, we validate again that New Jersey participates frequently in representation and response of best practices for protecting themselves. And we find that employees at the senior level, again, may recognize that there's policies and procedures in place, while again, those may not be always focused in on testing and instituting that there are continuous efforts to keep intact and protect. When we talk about technology that's out there, Adrian touched on many ways from a payment perspective to remove some of that responsibility from your organization by sending payment files. But there are simple tools too that can be phased in quickly to help support the fraudsters from taking your account. We recognize that sophistication comes into question of, well, our systems may be a little dated, or that from a budgetary perspective, we're doing some updates. We recognize with staffing being mobile the way they are today, that this creates somewhat of a crunch. We hear lots of reasons, again, for a pause, if you will, of looking at how to protect yourselves, limitations relative to the timeline of being able to look at. However, we know that the technology that exists today can be simply implemented by sharing data with your financial institution, so that if items don't match a dollar amount, a payee, and a check number, that we would actually alert you to share with you need to view this item. From an ACH capability, we would also alert you of a transaction that was being electronically debited from your account for you to view if it was legitimate or not, and authorize that payment or return that payment. It's a simplistic process relative to being able to share this information. And again, I spend about 80% of my day as a treasury management officer speaking with clients about protecting their accounts. Unfortunately, I have found that 80% is talking about fraud with clients in the year 2020 because they have been compromised in some way. Organizations that have been in place, especially government entities, for many decades and many years with some of the same staff procedurally reviewing data, could not have accounted for how or what may happen with a fraudster out there as they've taken the account information. So what do, right? We make sure that we talk about the layers and layers of what you can do in your organization to ensure that this doesn't happen and prevent those fraudsters from taking what's not legitimately theirs. People want to say, give me those specific points. Again, there's multiple layers. While fraud protection is offered by financial institutions to ensure that you can review that data, You have to dig deeper within your organization and make sure that you have segregation of duties. That, as again, we've been mobilized in different work environments, that you're sending data encrypted, that the policies and procedures that are currently in place with your entity are truly being instituted and reinforced on a regular basis. Here at our organization, we ensure that all of our employees are responsible for taking regular testing, again, about the authentication of emails, of how we send it with secured information, and how we receive and what we click on. All of those items can happen to you within a split second, not realizing that you've been attacked. So we encourage you to work with your IT team, ensuring that they've secured up your networks, that they've implemented firewalls, authenticate. Again, as I said earlier, anytime payments are requested to be changed in any type of format or that they are paper, you want to ensure that you've authenticated both written and verbally so that there's no alteration in what may a payment post as. So we've listed several risk management practices that we encourage, and we'll be sending this out with everyone so that you can review it. But it really is a summary of what we've talked about relative to fraud. We here at TD Bank call ourselves risk managers every day. It's driven from our executive leadership team down to each and every employee of how we touch customers and the sensitivity of information. As you work in your organization, it's about protecting your organization in every capacity to make things successful and efficient, while also ensuring that your protection is tight. You need to make sure that you're mandating controls and process. We also say, again, when we've looked at the mobilization, that you are not transacting personal information and social medias on the same site that you're doing your banking. Always pick up the phone. Always authenticate verbally. Again, most of your payables team is going to know the folks that they're talking to and can authenticate very quickly if they've been sent a fraudulent email that looked pretty good. We also encourage a lot of our clients for structuring accounts. And when we talk about that, it's really about designating payment accounts versus intermingling your payables and receivables in the same account. Use the services. They're very minimum cost for a protection that you sleep well at night and avoid having to talk to a police officer about your accounts being compromised.
Shannon, I hate to do this, but we're down to 5 minutes, 5-minute warning, less than 5
You
minutes.
got it. You got it. Again, I think that I have honed in pretty largely relative to what is available. And I encourage you, again, challenge your bankers, reach out to them. They can share some really rich information of how you can protect yourself. And I'm going to pass this over to Carla.
Yeah, and I will very briefly summarize. I think we've gone through a lot of content. And really, what do you do next? What's your next step? If you get hopefully some inspiration from this presentation today and some ideas, I recommend, and I think we would all recommend, that first consider what possibilities exist for your business. And you've spent a lot of time having this year to prioritize in ways that you haven't in the past. So before you look at where you are currently, your current self-assessment and process and what your environment is today, think about removing mental imagery of barriers, right? And think about what the possibilities for end-to-end processing and automation. And I think only then can you look at where you prioritized, what your condition is today, and then you can build a roadmap. And I think I would just leave you with this parting thought. I mean, I think that if there's one thing that's true, there will be new and more simplified ways to automate and digitize. That's absolutely not a question. The most important thing that you can do is be prepared. We don't yet know what the new payment mechanism of the future will be, but we know it is coming, and those entities who are most nimble will be ready to make the transition with ease, and those who do not prepare will likely face disruption. So finally, there's so much more information about this topic and how to protect yourself and how to automate. We do have a plan on October 1st to have a webinar of the most recent survey that we're conducting. So if you're interested in joining that webinar, here are some folks that you can contact in New Jersey who are working with your organizations on a regular basis, and they can connect you and send you the right link to get access to that. So hopefully I've left you enough time, but we appreciate everybody's attention for this important content.
Awesome. We do have a question. No, never mind. We do not have any questions. We're a little short on time though anyway, but I'm sure there's plenty of questions. And the subject matter was awesome. You know, in order to work remote, you need to be able to work remote. Just to piggyback on some of the statements from yesterday from our friends at Local Government Services, yeah, controls need to be in place, but those controls can be digital. In order to make this stuff work, the whole process needs to be digital approvals. And remember, a couple of years ago, you no longer have to have those vendor signatures, which slowed down the process and made it a manual process, so long as you set that in your policy and document your controls. So very, very good presentation. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I hope everyone else did too. I thank the guys from TD Bank once again, and we'll see everyone else after our lunch break.
Thank you.
Thank you for having
Have a
us.
good day.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.